Well, greetings again. This is Pastor Dan, and down here in Roanoke, Virginia. And I'm actually doing this on Saturday, but getting ready for Monday, September the 12th. Of course, we will have already celebrated, or at least had a memorial in reference to 9/11. It's one of the big things this weekend. Everyone, of course, has their eye on New York City and remember what happened 10 years ago. And we just kind of think about that. We realize that we often remember certain dates. Now, I think I mentioned to you before, not too long ago. Where were you? What were you doing on 9/11, or things of that nature. And then sometimes you can associate that with Pearl Harbor. What happened, what were you doing when you heard the news of Pearl Harbor, or what were you doing when you got the news that John F. Kennedy had been assassinated? Well, we do have things that remind us, and so the services that were actually held on Sunday were to be a reminder for what happened 10 years ago. And so we want to keep that in remembrance. But also, there's another thing in reference to this word, remembrance. Just a couple of days ago, I mentioned to you from 1 Peter chapter 1, where he said, Yea, I think it meet as long as I am in this tabernacle to stir you up by putting you in remembrance. And he used that word there. And he used that word again in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 1, where he says, This second epistle, beloved, I now write unto you, in both which I stir up your pure minds by way of remembrance. The word that was used there is that word from which we would get mnemonic device. Sometimes we use little clues or things that we can remember in order to bring something to our memory that we want to recall. And so we'll use little tricks. I had one that was called Puff-P-Tat. When I was in Washington Bible College, the professor often talked about, do whatever you can or do whatever you have to do in order to remember the various things that are listed in the lesson. And one of them was the 7 Feast of Israel. And I had Puff-P-Tat as mine. You start out with a Passover and unleavened bread and first fruits, and it just went on, and you could remember then what those were. Of course, I work now in a place where it uses all kinds of acronyms, and those acronyms are things that will help us to remember various words, various phrases that we use in the job. Well, that's all important, because you realize that we need to remember things that God has given to us. And certainly we want to do that. We want to do that by looking in the scriptures and realizing that God has an important message for us there. And even as Peter said here, he said, I want to put you in remembrance. In other words, it would be like we would say today, I want to remind you of something. And of course, what he was reminding them of was extremely important. When you look at 2 Peter, he was reminding them, especially of the things that happened there in 2 Peter chapter 1, and then in chapter 2, he's talking about false teachers, and then in chapter 3, he starts talking about the scoffers, and he starts talking about the day of the Lord. And so he wanted to remind them about these things, because they were going to be going into persecution, and probably had been in persecution. And so they needed to be reminded of what God had for them. Sometimes we forget. Now, the Israelites were prone to forgetting things. I mean, we can see that in the Exodus. When they were out there in the wilderness, they would go a short distance. They have a miracle from God. And then within a few days, they wonder what they're going to do. Where are they going to get their food? Where are they going to get their water? How are they going to survive? They wish they had been back in Egypt. They couldn't remember the miracles that God had done. Well, they needed to be reminded. And we're not a lot different than those Israelites. We realize what God does in our lives, and sometimes we forget. And we need to be reminded of the things that He has done, and that gives us a confidence of the things that He will do in the future. And certainly, as we look into the Scriptures, we realize that those things that he has promised in his scriptures will come to pass. And so that gives us a great amount of hope. And that's the thought that I would like to leave with you today, that even as you go out in the world today, remember what God has done. Remember your salvation. Remember how he's taken care of you all the days past. Sometimes people ask me, say, well, I don't see any evidence of what God's doing. And I look back and I say, well, in all my 73 years, God has never failed me. I've got all the needs that I need, and I have all the things that I need, and certainly he has taken care of me in each and every way. Now, it haven't been all really pleasant roads all the time, but he has never failed me. Never just left me utterly in darkness or destitute. I always have hope, and always have the hope that's in the scriptures. And so that's the thought that I'd like to leave with you today. And as we think about that, we can think about some of the prayer requests, knowing that God indeed does answer prayers. We think about those things, and we realize that many people have requested prayer. We still have some that have been on your list. Nothing has come in that's been new recently from any of you all out there. So if you do have any updates, let us know. Continue to pray for those people that you'll be in contact with, especially during the next few days. God's going to put you in the path of many people who do not know Christ as their Lord and Savior. And so pray for that opportunity, and then pray for that response that you might have for them. And, I kind of think about songs, and one of the songs that I was thinking about recently is "His Eye is on the Sparrow." I always like to sing that song, and I think of that little song, and I realize that God does indeed watch over the sparrow, and so I know he watches me. And may the Lord bless you and keep you and watch over you today. I know he will. And I pray that you'd have a good day and a safe day as you go out into the world and do all those things. Pray that you'd be blessed. And may God just bless you in the days to come. We ask it all in Christ's name. May he be glorified, from whom all blessings flow. See you tomorrow.